My pregnancy test was negative, and my husband smiled like he had been holding his breath for weeks. My doctor just swallowed hard and turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was a patient file complete with my husband's phone number. Then I saw the gestational age of 27 weeks. My stomach dropped because the woman on that file was not me. Yet the spouse listed under her name was the man who had kissed me goodbye that morning. My name is Gracie Coleman, and at 34 years old, I have spent the last decade of my life translating chaos into order. I work as a revenue integrity analyst at Ridgeview Women's Health Pavilion in Cincinnati, Ohio. It is a fancy title for a professional auditor of other people's mistakes. My days are consumed by rows of data, insurance codes, and billing discrepancies. I hunt for the missing pennies, the unbilled procedures, and the silent errors that slip through the cracks of a massive healthcare system. I am good at it because I believe in balance. I believe that if you input the correct variables and follow the established protocols, the result should always be accurate. It is a simple, comforting equation. However, for the last 2 years, my personal life has refused to balance the ledger. Our home in Mount Adams, a beautiful renovated Victorian that Caleb and I bought with dreams of filling the spare bedrooms, has become a silent testament to failure. It is too clean. The white carpets are spotless. The corners are free of toys. It feels less like a home and more like a waiting room that never calls your name. For 24 months, I have lived my life in 2-week increments. I have memorized the rhythm of my ovulation cycle better than I know my own social security number. I have purchased enough pregnancy tests to fund the pharmacy's quarterly bonus. Every month follows the same cruel script. Hope inflates in my chest like a fragile balloon, only to be popped by the sharp reality of a single pink line. That morning was no different. I woke up before the sun had fully risen over the Ohio River. The house was cold, and the bathroom tile stung my bare feet. I took the test with the mechanical precision of a woman who has done it a dozen times before. I set it on the marble counter and waited. I stared at the ceiling. I counted the seconds. When I finally looked down, the result was a flat, white denial, negative. I should have cried. In the beginning, I used to cry for hours, but now, after 2 years, the tears had been replaced by a dull, hollow ache. I threw the test into the trash can, burying it under a layer of tissues so Caleb would not see it. I knew the home test was accurate, but my brain refused to accept the data. I needed a blood test. I needed a lab technician to print out a piece of paper that said 0 so that I could finally close the file on this month and start the exhausting process of trying again. I walked into the kitchen, trying to compose my face into a mask of neutrality. Caleb was already dressed. Caleb Reed, the man who could sell a mortgage to a ghost, stood by the coffee maker. He looked handsome in his navy suit, the one I had picked out for him last Christmas. He was typing furiously on his phone, his thumb moving in a blur. "I can't go with you this morning, Gracie," he said without looking up. His voice was smooth, practiced. I paused by the refrigerator. "I didn't ask you to go yet." "I know," he said, finally sliding his phone into his pocket. He turned to me, flashing that charming, lopsided smile that had made me fall in love with him 5 years ago. "But I know today is the day for the blood work. I wish I could be there, babe, really, but I'm closing a massive file today. The financing on the Grimshaw estate is shaky, and if I don't get these signatures by noon, the whole deal implodes." He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and pulled me into a hug. It felt wrong. Usually, Caleb's hugs were grounding, a solid anchor in my day. Today, his arms felt rigid. He squeezed me quickly, his body leaning away before he had even fully made contact. It was the embrace of a man who was already halfway out the door. It was the hug of someone fleeing a secret. "Call me as soon as you know," he said, kissing my forehead. He smelled of expensive cologne and coffee. "I love you." "Love you too," I whispered. But the door was already clicking shut behind him. I stood alone in the silence of our perfect, empty kitchen, listening to the sound of his car engine fading down the street. The drive to Ridgeview Women's Health usually took 20 minutes, but my mind was elsewhere. I parked in the employee lot out of habit, even though today I was a patient. Walking into the main entrance always brought a wave of sensory memories. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and floor wax. The reception area was a symphony of ringing phones and the rhythmic squeak of nurses' rubber-soled shoes on the linoleum. I checked in and took a seat in the corner of the waiting room, trying to make myself invisible. This was the hardest part. The waiting room was a minefield of triggers. Across from me sat a young mother, looking exhausted but radiant. She was bouncing a baby on her knee, a tiny thing wrapped in a yellow blanket. The baby cooed, a soft, bubbling sound that cut through the noise of the television mounted on the wall. I watched them, and my heart physically contracted. It was a sharp, jealous pain that made me feel like a monster. I wanted that fatigue. I wanted that heavy weight in my arms. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Life is not a spreadsheet, I told myself. You cannot audit your way to a miracle. I tried to summon the logic that made me good at my job. Biology is random. Statistics are cold. There is no manager to complain to about fairness. But deep down, beneath the layers of rationalization, I still desperately wanted to believe in a rule of law. I wanted to believe that if I was a good person, if I loved my husband, if I prepared a safe home, the universe would eventually balance the books. Gracie Coleman? I opened my eyes. A medical assistant I knew, Sarah, was standing by the door with a clipboard. She gave me a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile. She knew. Everyone here knew. She led me back to an exam room, not the lab. That was the first sign that today would be different. "Doctor, Carlisle wants to see you before the draw," Sarah said. Avoiding my eyes. Doctor. Raymond Carlisle had been my family's doctor for 30 years. He had delivered my younger sister. He had seen me through broken arms and flu seasons. He was a man of immense warmth, usually greeting me with a booming voice and questions about my father's retirement or my garden. When he entered the room today, the temperature seemed to drop. He did not boom. He did not smile. He walked in with his shoulders hunched slightly under his white coat, looking at the floor. "Hello, Gracie," he said. His voice was quiet, lacking its usual resonance. "Hi, Dr. Carlisle," I said, sitting on the edge of the exam table, clutching my purse. "Is everything okay? Sarah said you wanted to talk before the blood test." He sat down on his rolling stool and turned toward his computer terminal. He typed in his password, his movements jerky and uncharacteristically nervous. "I just wanted to check in. How are you feeling? Any changes since last month?" "No," I said, my voice sounding small in the sterile room. "I took a home test this morning. Negative. Again. Doctor." Carlisle nodded slowly. He was staring at his screen, his face illuminated by the blue light of the monitor. He stopped typing and just sat there, his hands resting on his knees. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. It was not the comfortable silence of a doctor reviewing a chart. It was the heavy, loaded silence of a man weighing a heavy burden. He looked like he was trapped between the strict professional ethics of his medical license and a screaming moral conscience. "Raymond?" I asked, dropping the formalities. "What is it?" He turned to look at me, and for a split second, I saw genuine distress in his eyes. He looked tired. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning. "Gracie," he started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. "Sometimes, the numbers on the page do not tell the whole story. Sometimes, there are factors outside of physiology." "I don't understand," I said. "Are you saying there is something wrong with me that you haven't told me?" "No," he said quickly. "You are healthy. Your husband. His initial tests were fine." He stumbled over the word husband as if it tasted like vinegar. Then, "Doctor." Carlisle did something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. In my line of work, we are trained on data privacy. When a doctor leaves a room, or even turns away from a patient, they are supposed to minimize the window or lock the screen. It is a reflex. It is a rule. "Doctor?" Carlyle stood up abruptly. I need to go grab a physical file from the archives. I will be right back. He did not lock his computer. He did not minimize the window. In fact, as he stood up, he deliberately swiveled the monitor arm. He didn't turn it away from me. He turned it toward the empty guest chair next to his desk. The angle was precise. If I stayed where I was, I could not see it clearly. But if I took one step forward, the screen would be fully visible. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the latch. He did not look back at me. He just stared at the wood grain of the door for a second, then stepped into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar. I sat there, frozen. The room was silent except for the hum of the computer tower. The screen glowed, a beacon in the dim room. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Doctor. Carlyle was a stickler for protocol. He never left a chart open. Never. I looked at the door, then back at the screen. The cursor blinked. A steady, rhythmic pulse inviting me closer. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. I knew, with the instinct of an analyst who spots a discrepancy in the ledger, that something was wrong. I slid off the exam table, my feet making no sound on the floor, and took that single, fatal step toward the light. I knew he'd just handed me permission to look. I stood there, the hum of the computer tower vibrating against my thigh, and replayed the conversation from just moments ago in my head. It echoed with a sickening clarity. He had looked at my chart, the paper crinkling under his nervous fingers, and told me that my body was a fortress of health. He listed off the metrics with clinical precision. My follicle-stimulating hormone levels were optimal. My thyroid function was perfect. My uterine lining was exactly the thickness required to nurture a life. From a purely physiological standpoint, I was a textbook candidate for motherhood. There is no medical reason preventing you from carrying a child, Gracie, he had said. For a heartbeat, a flush of warmth had spread through my chest. It was the dangerous, intoxicating heat of hope. If I was broken, I could be fixed. If it was just a hormone imbalance, there was a pill for that. If it was a structural issue, there was surgery. But then Dr. Carlyle had shattered that logic with a single, cryptic sentence. Sometimes, he had said, staring at the wall rather than my face, the equation does not solve because the variables are not in the body. The warmth in my chest had turned to ice. I had asked the question that any wife in my position would ask. The question that had been gnawing at the back of my mind for months, but which I had been too afraid to voice. Is it Caleb? I had asked. Is there something in his results? I know he said his analysis was fine, but did he lie to me to protect my feelings? That was when Dr. Carlyle had frozen. It was a subtle reaction, but I have spent my entire career analyzing minute discrepancies in behavior and data. His hand had tightened around his pen until his knuckles turned white. A bead of sweat, small and treacherous, had broken loose from his hairline and tracked a slow path down his temple. He did not answer me. Instead, he had stood up abruptly, the legs of his stool screeching against the linoleum, and announced he needed to retrieve a file from the archives. But before he crossed the threshold, he had paused. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound, professional sorrow. "You are a smart woman, Gracie," he had said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You are excellent at reading numbers. If you see something on this screen, I want you to remember one thing. It is not your fault." Now, alone in the room, those words hung in the air like smoke. I took a breath that rattled in my lungs and looked down at the glowing monitor. The screen was bright, an electronic eye staring back at me. My vision blurred for a second, my brain trying to reject what it was seeing. But then the revenue integrity analyst in me took over. I stopped being a wife. I became an auditor. I compartmentalized the panic and focused on the data fields. The patient profile was open. The name at the top was not mine. Brianna Hale. I did not know a Brianna Hale. The name meant nothing to me. It sounded soft, innocent. like the name of a girl who worked at a bakery or taught Sunday school. I scanned down the demographics section. She was 26 years old. She lived in East Price Hill. My eyes drifted lower to the clinical notes, and the world tilted on its axis. Diagnosis: pregnancy, intrauterine, gestational age, 27 weeks. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. 27 weeks. That was 6 months and 3 weeks. I did the math instantly, involuntarily. That meant this woman had conceived almost 7 months ago. 7 months ago. Caleb and I had been in the darkest trench of our fertility struggle. I had been taking temperature readings every morning. I had been scheduling our intimacy like business meetings, and while I was crying over single pink lines, this woman, this Brianna Hale, was already growing a life. But denial is a powerful drug. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Dr. Carlisle had pulled up the wrong Caleb Reed's partner. It is a common name. There could be dozens of Caleb Reeds in Cincinnati. I moved the mouse. My hand trembled, the cursor dancing across the screen until it hovered over the section labeled partner/spouse. Name: Caleb Reed. Contact: 513-555-0198. The air left the room. That was the number I dialed every day on my way home from work. That was the number I texted when we were out of milk. That was the number attached to the man who had kissed me goodbye 2 hours ago and told me he was closing a file on the Grimshaw estate. He was closing a file. All right, just not the one he told me about. I felt a scream building in my throat, a raw, primal sound that wanted to tear its way out. But then my eyes caught something else, something that shifted my horror into a cold, lethal rage. At the bottom of the screen was the billing information. In the healthcare industry, the guarantor is the person responsible for the bill. The policyholder is the person whose insurance covers the cost. Primary insurance: Blue Cross, Blue Shield. Policy number ending in 4590. Subscriber: name: Gracie Coleman. I stared at my own name on the screen. It was impossible. And yet, there it was, in black and white pixels, my insurance policy, the family plan I paid for through my job at Ridgeview, because the premiums were better than what Caleb could get as an independent broker. I clicked on the Claims History tab. The list populated instantly: prenatal visit, ultrasound, blood panel, glucose tolerance test. The dates lined up perfectly with the days Caleb had been working late or meeting clients for dinner. He was not just cheating on me. He was not just having a baby with another woman. He was using my health insurance, my hard-earned benefits, to pay for it. He had stolen my identity to subsidize his betrayal. He had listed this woman, this Brianna, as a dependent, likely forging a marriage certificate or an affidavit of domestic partnership to bypass the system's checks. I looked at the total patient responsibility column. $0. I had paid for the ultrasound that showed him his child's heartbeat. I had paid for the vitamins that nourished the woman who was sleeping with my husband. The door handle clicked. I spun around, moving away from the computer just as Dr. Carlisle stepped back into the room. He was clutching a manila folder to his chest like a shield. He looked at me, and then his eyes darted to the screen. He saw that I had seen. He did not say a word. He just walked over to the desk and hit the power button on the monitor. The screen went black, erasing Brianna Hale, erasing the baby, erasing the 27 weeks of lies, but the image was burned into my retinas. "I am sorry, Gracie," he whispered. I did not cry. I could not cry. The tears had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I smoothed down the front of my skirt. I picked up my purse. "Thank you, doctor," I said. My voice sounded strange, robotic, like it was coming from a radio in another room. "I have everything I need." I walked out of the office, past the smiling receptionist, past the mother bouncing her baby in the waiting room. I did not feel jealous of her anymore. I did not feel anything but the weight of the secret I was now carrying. My pregnancy test was negative, but I was leaving the clinic with something far heavier than a child. I was leaving with a ledger that needed to be balanced, and I knew exactly where to start. I walked out of Ridgeview Women's Health Pavilion, and the automatic doors slid shut behind me with a finality that felt like a prison gate closing. The parking lot was bathed in the harsh, flat light of midday, but I felt nothing. There were no tears burning the corners of my eyes. There was no lump in my throat. The devastation that should have brought me to my knees had been flash frozen by the shock of what I had seen on Dr. Carlyle's screen. Inside my chest, where my heart used to be, there was only a sheet of thick, impenetrable ice. I drove home on autopilot. I navigated the familiar twists and turns of the Columbia Parkway without truly seeing the road. My mind was no longer processing the scenery. It was re-indexing the last 5 years of my life. Every late night Caleb had spent at the office, every weekend business trip to Cleveland or Columbus, every time he had been too tired for intimacy, I had attributed all of it to his ambition, to the volatile nature of the mortgage market. Now, I saw the data for what it really was. It was not ambition, it was overhead. He was running 2 households, and I was the primary investor. When I pulled into the driveway of our home in Mount Adams, the house looked different. Just that morning, it had been my sanctuary, the place where I hoped to raise a family. Now, as I stared at the manicured hedges and the charcoal gray siding, it looked like a crime scene. It was a beautiful, expensive shell that held nothing but evidence. I walked inside, and the silence that usually felt lonely now felt heavy with deceit. I looked at the wedding photo hanging in the foyer, Caleb and I laughing on a beach in Maui, and I did not see a husband and wife. I saw a con artist and his mark. I did not collapse on the sofa. I did not call my mother. I went upstairs, changed out of my work clothes, and put on the oversized sweater Caleb liked. I washed my face, ensuring no trace of the clinic's sterile lighting remained. I needed to be a blank canvas. I needed to be exactly who he expected to see. Caleb did not come home until after 7 in the evening. I heard the garage door rumble open, followed by the heavy thud of his car door. I was sitting on the living room couch, a book open on my lap that I had not read a single word of. When he walked in, he brought a gust of cool air and the scent of the city with him. He looked ragged, his tie loosened, his suit jacket slung over one arm. It was a perfect performance of the hard-working provider. He saw me and paused. His eyes didn't go to my face first. They darted to my hands, looking for a tissue, then to the coffee table, looking for a medical pamphlet. He was scanning for data before he engaged. "Gracie?" he asked, his voice pitched low, dripping with a concern that I now recognized as a script. He dropped his keys on the console table and walked over, kneeling beside the couch so he was at eye level with me. "I have been dying to call you all day, but the Grimshaw meeting ran straight through lunch and into a dinner prep. I am so sorry I wasn't there." He took my hands. His palms were warm. I remembered the dates on the screen. Prenatal follow-up, 27 weeks. He had held another woman's hands with these same fingers. He had probably felt a baby kick with these same palms. "What did Dr. Carlyle say?" he asked. The question hung between us. His eyes were wide, simulating empathy, but I saw the tightness at the corners. He was terrified. He wasn't afraid I was sick. He was afraid I was pregnant. If I was pregnant, his carefully bifurcated life would collapse. He couldn't afford 2 babies. He couldn't manage 2 mothers. I looked him dead in the eye and delivered the only line that would keep me safe. "Negative," I said softly. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The breath he had been holding whooshed out of him in a long, shuddering exhale. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure, unadulterated relief. He wasn't sad. He was saved. "Oh, Gracie," he said, pulling me into a hug, burying his face in my neck to hide his smile. "I am so sorry. Honey, I know how much you wanted this." "It is okay," I said, patting his back mechanically. "Maybe it just isn't our time yet." He pulled back, and the relief was already being repackaged as supportive optimism. "Exactly. That is exactly right. We have been putting too much pressure on ourselves. The stress, the tracking, the doctors. It is too much. We need to take a break, just for a few months. Let's get your body back to normal. Let's just enjoy being us. He was closing the deal. He wanted to stop the treatments not because of stress, but because he was already a father elsewhere. He needed to divert funds. He needed to stop me from looking too closely at the insurance statements. Just then, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a sharp, intrusive sound. Caleb flinched. He reached for it with the speed of a striking cobra. I saw the screen light up. No name, just a number. He pressed the side button to silence it, flipped the phone face down, and covered the microphone with his hand, all in one fluid motion. "Work?" I asked, keeping my voice dull and lifeless. "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "The underwriter. He is relentless. I am not answering that tonight. Tonight is about us." He stood up, looking energized. "I am going to take a quick shower, wash the day off, and then I am going to order us that Thai food you like. We are going to watch a movie and not talk about babies or doctors. Okay?" "Okay," I whispered. "You are the strongest woman I know," he said, kissing the top of my head before bounding up the stairs. I waited until I heard the water running in the master bathroom. The moment the pipes groaned, the grieving wife vanished, and the revenue integrity analyst took her place. I did not move frantically. Panic causes errors. I moved with the precision of a forensic accountant. I knew I had about 15 minutes. I went to the home office we shared. I did not touch his laptop. He would notice if it was moved even an inch. Instead, I sat at my own desktop and opened a private browsing window. I logged into our joint bank account. I didn't look at the checking balance. That was for amateurs. I went straight to the Statements tab. I downloaded the PDFs for the last 12 months, saving them to a hidden, password-protected folder on my external hard drive. Then I went to the Transfers section. I saw the pattern immediately. Small, irregular transfers to an external account labeled Caleb, LLC, operating. He had told me he set up an LLC for tax purposes related to his commission checks. I traced the dates. The transfers increased in frequency 7 months ago. $500 here, $300 there, just enough to look like business expenses, but cumulatively enough to furnish a nursery. I took screenshots of everything. Then I pulled my own credit report. I needed to know how deep the rot went. My hands flew across the keyboard. Name, social security number, date of birth. The report generated in 30 seconds. I scanned the open accounts section. Mortgage, car lease, student loans, paid off, and then, there it was. A line of credit I did not recognize, opened 5 months ago. Limit, $20,000. Balance, $14,000. My stomach churned. He hadn't just used my insurance. He had leveraged my credit score. He was borrowing against my future to build a life with someone else. I clicked for more details. The authorization method was listed as spousal power of attorney. My blood ran cold. I had never signed a power of attorney. I had never authorized him to sign for me. That meant there was a forgery somewhere. A piece of paper with my name scrawled in his handwriting. Notarized by God knows who. Probably one of his friends in the real estate title business. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I closed the windows, cleared the browser history, and ejected the external drive. I slipped the drive into the pocket of my sweatpants. By the time Caleb walked downstairs, smelling of soap and deception, I was back on the couch, staring blankly at the television. "Food is on the way," he announced cheerfully, rubbing his wet hair with a towel. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the man I had vowed to love in sickness and in health. I saw the man who had stolen my money, my medical privacy, and my trust. He thought the crisis was over because the pregnancy test was negative. He thought he had managed the risk. He had no idea that the audit had just begun. The next morning, I arrived at Ridgeview Women's Health Pavilion at 6:45. The janitorial staff was still buffing the floors, the waxing machine humming a low, rhythmic drone that echoed through the empty lobby. I needed the silence. I needed the unimpeded bandwidth of the early morning to perform the kind of autopsy that did not require a scalpel. I sat at my desk, the ergonomic chair creaking slightly in the quiet room. I logged into the internal billing system with my administrative credentials. As a revenue integrity analyst, I had broad access to claims data. It was my job to audit accounts for compliance, to ensure that insurance companies were not overcharging or underpaying. Today, I was auditing my own life. I pulled up the master claim file for policy number ending in 4590. The screen populated instantly, a cascade of blue text against a white background. I exported the data into a spreadsheet, my comfort zone, and began to filter the results. I isolated every claim made in the last 7 months that was not generated by my own gynecologist or my primary care physician. The results were a damning list of codes that mocked my infertility. Code Pietzi Devini Chetri Nulla Nulli. Routine obstetric care, including antepartum care, vaginal delivery, and postpartum care. Code 76805. Ultrasound. Pregnant uterus. Real-time with image documentation. I looked at the service dates. They were surgical strikes on my memory. October 14th. That was the day Caleb told me he had to drive to Columbus for a networking event with a commercial developer. He had sent me a text that night complaining about the hotel mattress, according to the timestamp on the claim, at 3 p.m. While he was supposedly checking into a hotel 2 hours away, he was actually sitting in an exam room in East Price Hill, approving a 20-week anatomy scan. I focused on the provider address listed on the external claims. The facility was a small community clinic, not part of the Ridgeview network, which explained why I hadn't seen the appointments in our local scheduling system earlier. But the billing address for the patient, the address where the explanation of benefits was being mailed, was not our home in Mount Adams. It was an address on Elberon Avenue in East Price Hill. I copied the address onto a sticky note. My hand did not shake. The ice in my chest had spread to my limbs, making my movements precise and deliberate. I left the office at 9 o'clock, telling my supervisor I had a banking issue to resolve. It was not a lie. I drove to the main branch of our bank downtown, the one with the marble floors and the intimidating high ceilings. I sat across from a personal banker named Timothy, a young man with an eager smile and a tie that was too wide for his collar. I need to review the origination documents for the line of credit attached to my profile, I said. The one opened 5 months ago. Timothy tapped on his keyboard. Of course, Mrs. Reed. I see it right here. A home equity line of credit for $20,000. It looks like $14,000 has been drawn down so far. I need to see the signature card, I said. And the authorization. He looked confused. Is there a problem with the account? I just need to verify the signature. Timothy. He printed a document and slid it across the mahogany desk. I stared at the bottom of the page. There, in digital ink, was my name, Gracie Coleman. It looked like my signature. It had the sharp slant of the C and the loops I made on the L's. To a casual observer, or a busy bank teller, it was perfect. But I knew the muscle memory of my own hand. When I signed my name, I always lifted the pen slightly between the first and last name. This signature was one continuous, fluid line. It was a trace. Someone had taken a sample of my signature from a check or a mortgage document, scanned it, and used a digital pad to replicate it. And this, Timothy said, sliding another paper over. This is the power of attorney on file. It allows Mr. Reed to sign on your behalf for all financial instruments related to real estate and equity. I picked up the document. It was dated 6 months ago. The notary stamp belonged to a man named Marcus Dean. I knew Marcus. He was Caleb's drinking buddy, a title officer who often joked about how much paperwork he rubber-stamped without reading. Thank you, I said. I folded the papers and put them in my purse. Timothy, I need to open a new checking account. Individual, sole ownership, and I need to transfer the entirety of my savings from the joint account into it, immediately. Timothy blinked. All of it? Mrs. Reed, that is a significant transfer. It might trigger a fraud alert for your husband if he has alerts set up. Let it trigger, I said. But do it as a cashier's check deposit so the funds are available instantly, and while you are doing that, I need you to freeze the line of credit. No more draws allowed as of this minute. I walked out of the bank 20 minutes later. I had effectively severed the financial artery that was feeding Caleb's double life. I sat in my car and opened the credit bureau apps on my phone. Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, one by one. I placed a security freeze on my social security number. If Caleb tried to open so much as a store credit card in my name today, he would be declined. The final piece of the forensic puzzle fell into place that evening. Caleb was in the shower again, his new ritual to wash away the scent of his other life. I went into our bedroom and picked up his suit vest from the chair where he had discarded it. It was a gray herringbone vest, one I had bought him for our anniversary. I checked the pockets. It was a habit I had developed years ago to check for dry cleaning tags. But tonight, I was hunting for something else. Inside the inner pocket, crumpled into a tight ball, was a receipt. I smoothed it out on the dresser. It was from a boutique baby store called the Stork's Nest. The date was from yesterday, during the time he said he was closing the Grimshaw file. Item: crib mattress. Price: $189. Item: fitted sheets, organic cotton. Price: $45. And there, at the bottom, was the delivery instruction. Deliver to Brianna Hale, East Price Hill. Gate code 1984. I stared at the paper. He wasn't just paying for medical bills. He was nesting. He was buying organic cotton sheets for a child he had made with another woman, using the credit line he had stolen from me. I put the receipt back in the pocket, exactly as I had found it. I did not want him to know I knew. Not yet. If I confronted him now, he would lie. He would gaslight me. He would say it was a gift for a client, a misunderstanding, a mistake. He would use his salesman's charm to try and talk his way out of the trap. I needed more than paper. I needed to see the reality. I needed to see the woman who was sleeping on those organic sheets. I looked at the address on the sticky note again. East Price Hill. It was only 15 minutes away. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. Caleb began to hum a tune in the shower. Something cheerful and light. He had no idea that the walls of his carefully constructed world were already burning down. He thought he was safe because I had said negative. He did not realize that I had just finished the audit, and the findings were catastrophic. It was time to stop reading the file and meet the beneficiary. I was going to East Price Hill. I pulled my car to the curb on Elberon Avenue. 3 blocks away from the address on the sticky note, I did not want Caleb's car, if he happened to be there, to be spotted next to mine. I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the scent of the cheap vanilla car air freshener. On the passenger seat sat my prop, a pastel yellow gift box tied with a white ribbon, containing a generic plush bear and a set of organic bibs I had purchased 20 minutes ago. I had printed a fake badge at the office that morning, laminating it with the ID machine used for temporary contractors. It read, Baby Steps Market Research. I was no longer Gracie the wife. I was Gracie the collector of data. I walked up the street. The neighborhood in East Price Hill was older. A mix of faded Victorian homes divided into apartments and brick buildings that had seen better decades. The building at the address was modest but well-maintained. There were flower pots on the stoop. It had a warmth to it that my pristine, sterile home in Mount Adams lacked. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, apartment 2B. On the floor in front of the door lay a choir doormat. It had the words, Home Sweet Home, printed in cheerful, scrolling black script. I stared at it. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. This was his home sweet home. My house was just his bank branch. I knocked 3 times. Firm, professional, friendly. A moment later, the peephole darkened. Then, the chain rattled, and the door opened. Brianna Hale stood there. Seeing her in a photograph on a computer screen was one thing. Seeing her in 3 dimensions was a physical blow. She was younger than me, perhaps 26. She had a softness to her features, a lack of the hard lines that stress and auditing had carved into my face. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore oversized gray sweatpants and a tight white t-shirt that hugged a very prominent, very real baby bump. She looked tired, but kind. She looked like a woman who was waiting for someone to come home. "Hi?" she asked, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Good morning," I said, putting on my best customer service smile. "I am sorry to disturb you. My name is Sarah, and I am with Baby Steps Market Research. We are doing a random survey of expectant mothers in the zip code to improve local prenatal services. We have a small gift for your time, and it only takes about 5 minutes." I held up the yellow box. Brianna hesitated, looking past me into the empty hallway. She was lonely. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped. She was a woman pregnant in a city where she likely didn't know many people, waiting for a husband who was currently living a double life. "Oh," she said, her face brightening slightly. "I guess that is okay. Caleb, my husband, is at work, so I have a bit of time." My husband. The words hit me like a physical slap, but I didn't flinch. "That is wonderful," I said. "May I come in?" She stepped back and opened the door wide. "Sure, sorry about the mess. I am still trying to get everything organized before the baby comes." I stepped across the threshold, and the air in the apartment paralyzed me. It didn't smell like a stranger's house. It smelled like him. It was a mix of the cedarwood laundry detergent we used and his specific brand of shaving cream. My eyes scanned the room with the speed of a predator. To my left, hanging on a simple wooden coat rack, was a brown leather jacket. I stopped breathing. I knew that jacket. I had bought it for Caleb 3 years ago at Nordstrom for his 32nd birthday. It had a small scuff on the right elbow from when he slipped on the ice last winter. I had watched him leave the house with it 2 days ago. He had told me he left it at the office. Below the jacket, on a plastic shoe tray, sat a pair of gray wool slip-ons, Allbirds. I had a matching pair in my closet. We had bought them together online during a Black Friday sale. I forced my feet to move. Following Brianna into the small living room, the furniture was mismatched, likely secondhand, but the space was cozy. And there, on the mantel above the faux fireplace, was the centerpiece of my torture. It was a framed photograph, Caleb and Brianna, standing on a beach, the ocean blue and sparkling behind them. His arm was around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. He was wearing a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up. I remembered packing that shirt. It was last July. He told me he had a conference in Florida for mortgage brokers. He said it would be boring. Just seminars and networking dinners. I had ironed that shirt for him. I had folded it carefully so it wouldn't wrinkle. I had kissed him goodbye and told him to try to have some fun. He had, "You have a lovely home," I said, my voice steady despite the screaming in my head. "Is this your first baby?" "Yes," Brianna said, sitting down on the sofa and gesturing for me to take the armchair. She rubbed her belly. "We are having a girl. It has been a bit of a whirlwind. Caleb works so hard, you know. He is in real estate, so the hours are crazy. He tries to be here as much as he can, but work comes first," I finished for her. "Yeah," she smiled sadly. "He is trying to build a future for us. He has had a hard life. He does not talk about it much. But his ex-wife, she was really difficult." I froze, my pen hovering over my fake clipboard. "His ex-wife?" Brianna nodded, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence. "She was mentally abusive, very controlling. She was obsessed with money and status. Caleb said she made him feel small. He said living with her was like living in a courtroom. She wouldn't give him a divorce for the longest time, just to punish him. That is why we had to keep things quiet for a while." I sat there, listening to my own character assassination. I was the villain in her fairy tale. I was the monster under the bed. The woman who paid the mortgage, who managed his credit score, who ironed his shirts, was now the abusive ex who wouldn't let him go. It was a brilliant narrative. It explained why he was gone at night. It explained why she couldn't meet his family. It made him the victim and her the savior. "That sounds terrible," I said. "I am glad he found you." "Me too," she beamed. "Do you want to see the nursery? It is the only room that is actually finished." "I would love to." I followed her down the short hallway. She pushed open a door painted a soft lavender. The room was perfect. It was everything my spare room in Mount Adams was not. A white crib stood against the wall, the one from the receipt I had found in his pocket. A plush rocking chair sat in the corner. Above the crib, large wooden letters spelled out a name. Mara. I stared at the name. Mara. It was the name I had told Caleb I liked 5 years ago. Back when we first started trying, he had said it was too old-fashioned. Apparently, it wasn't the name he hated. It was the mother. "It is beautiful," I managed to say. "You must be so excited." "I am," she said, leaning against the door frame. "It feels good to finally be settled, with the legal stuff and everything." I turned to look at her. "The legal stuff?" "Yeah, getting married," she said casually. "I know people do big weddings, but with the baby coming and his situation with his ex, we just wanted it done. We went to the courthouse in Claremont County last month." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Claremont County, a different jurisdiction, far enough away from Hamilton County to avoid immediate cross-referencing if someone wasn't looking. "Congratulations," I said. "That is a big step. It makes it real," she said. She walked over to a small dresser and picked up a framed document, handing it to me proudly. "We are going to hang this up once we get a nice frame." I took the paper. It was a standard marriage certificate, complete with the embossed seal of the state of Ohio. I scanned the names. Bride, Brianna Marie Hale. Groom, Caleb J. Reed. I blinked, looking closer. R.E. I.D. My husband's name was Caleb Reed. R.E. E.D. I looked at the date of birth. It was off by 2 days. I looked at the Social Security number field, which was partially redacted, but the last 4 digits were different from the ones I knew by heart. The room spun. He hadn't just lied. He had created a completely separate legal entity. He had likely used a fake birth certificate or an altered passport to obtain a driver's license with a slightly different spelling. Caleb J. Reed was a ghost, a phantom created solely to marry this woman and legitimize this child without alerting the state systems that Caleb Reed was already married to Gracie Coleman. This was not a crime of passion. This was a felony. This was bigamy, fraud, and forgery, executed with a level of premeditation that made my blood run cold. "He looks so happy in the photos," I said, handing the certificate back to her. My hands were shaking, but she didn't notice. She was too busy looking at the piece of paper that proved she was a wife. "He is," she said. "He says this is his second chance at life." I looked at Brianna, standing there in the lavender room, holding the proof of a crime she thought was a vow. She had no idea that her marriage was void. She had no idea that her husband was a criminal. She had no idea that the woman standing in her nursery, holding a clipboard and a plush bear, was about to burn her world to the ground. "Thank you for your time, Brianna," I said, handing her the yellow gift box. "I have everything I need." "Thank you," she said, taking the box. "I hope your survey helps." "Oh, it will," I said, walking toward the door. "You have been incredibly helpful, more than you know." I walked down the stairs and out onto the street. The sun was shining, but the world looked gray. I passed the Home Sweet Home mat again. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I did not start the engine immediately. I sat there, staring at the building, knowing that inside, Brianna was opening a gift from the woman who was about to destroy her life, but I had no choice. Caleb had created this collision. He had put us on this track, and now I had the evidence to ensure that when the crash happened, I would be the one wearing the seatbelt. I left Elberon Avenue that first day with my mind operating in a cold, suspended state of shock. I drove around for 2 hours, aimlessly navigating the hills of Cincinnati, until the gaslight on my dashboard chimed. I did not go home to Mount Adams. I checked into a generic business hotel near the highway, the kind with thin walls and fluorescent lighting. I needed neutral ground. I needed to think without seeing Caleb's toothbrush next to mine, or the baby steps bear sitting on Brianna's coffee table. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the anger had settled into a heavy, leaden resolve. I realized I had a choice. I could go straight to the police, have Caleb arrested, and let Brianna find out when the squad cars showed up at her door. That would be the clean, legal route. But I kept thinking about her face when she talked about the nursery. I kept thinking about the baby. Mara. If the police kicked down her door, the shock alone could kill that pregnancy. Brianna was not the criminal here. She was just another line item in Caleb's fraudulent ledger. Unaware that she was being embezzled, I had to be the one to tell her. It had to be me. I drove back to East Price Hill at 10 in the morning. I did not wear the casual clothes of Sarah from Market Research. I wore my charcoal suit, the one I wore for board presentations. I pulled my hair back into a severe twist. I carried a leather portfolio, not a gift box. I was done playing games. I climbed the stairs to apartment 2B. The home sweet home mat was still there, mocking me. I knocked. When Brianna opened the door, she looked tired. She was wearing a robe, her hand resting habitually on the swell of her stomach. Her eyes lit up with confusion when she saw me. "Sarah?" she asked, tilting her head. "Did you forget something?" "My name is not Sarah," I said. My voice was low, steady, and stripped of all pretense. "And I am not from a market research company." Brianna's smile faltered. She pulled her robe tighter, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "I don't understand. Who are you?" "May I come in, Brianna?" I asked. "It is about Caleb. It is urgent." She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. But the mention of his name was the key. She stepped back, and I walked into the living room. The sun was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The photo of them on the beach was still on the mantel. I walked to the coffee table and unzipped my portfolio. I did not sit down. "I need you to look at something," I said. I pulled out a document and laid it on the table. It was my marriage license, certified, stamped, and dated 5 years ago. Next to it, I placed a wedding photograph. It was an 8x10 glossy print. In it, Caleb was wearing a black tuxedo, and I was in a lace gown. We were cutting a 3-tiered cake. The date stamp was digitally printed in the corner. June 12th, 2021. Brianna looked at the papers, then up at me. She didn't touch them. She looked like a child who had been asked to touch a hot stove. "What is this?" she whispered. "I am Gracie Coleman," I said. "I am Caleb's wife, his legal wife, his current wife." Brianna laughed. It was a brittle, high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria. "That is not funny. You are the crazy one. He told me about you. He said you might try to contact me. Look at the date." "Brianna," I said, pointing to the photo. "Look at his face. Does he look like a man who was divorced 5 years ago?" That photo was taken at the Hilton Netherland Plaza. We celebrated our anniversary there 3 months ago. I reached into the portfolio again. "And this," I said, laying down the printout of the insurance claim, "is the billing record for your ultrasound last week. Look at the policy holder. That is my name. You are on my insurance plan. Brianna, listed as a spouse, but you are not the spouse on the policy." Brianna finally reached out. Her hand was trembling so violently that she could barely grasp the paper. She stared at the insurance document. Then she looked at my marriage license. She looked at the groom's name, Caleb Reed. "He spells it R-E-I-D, she stammered, tears beginning to pool in her eyes. He showed me his driver's license. "He has 2, I said softly. "One for the life he lives with me in Mount Adams, and one for the life he lives with you here." I watched the truth land. It was physically painful to witness. It didn't wash over her. It struck her. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like someone had opened a drain in her neck. Her lips turned a pale, chalky blue. She looked from the photo of me and Caleb to the photo on her mantel. The same man, the same smile, the same eyes. "No," she wheezed. "No, we are married. We have a baby coming. He loves me. He is lying to both of us." "Brianna," I said. "He is using my credit to buy your crib. He is using my insurance to pay for your doctor. He is not a victim. He is a predator." Brianna made a sound that I will never forget. A low, guttural keen of pure devastation. She took a step back, her hands clutching her belly as if she could physically shield the baby from the truth. Then she gasped. It wasn't a gasp of surprise, it was a gasp of pain. She doubled over, gripping the back of the sofa. "Oh God," she groaned. "Oh God, it hurts." I dropped my portfolio. The auditor vanished. The vindictive wife vanished. I was a woman standing in front of another woman who was in medical distress. "Brianna?" I moved toward her. "What is it? Is it a contraction?" "It is tight," she gasped, her face twisting in agony. "It won't stop. It feels like something is tearing." She looked down. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across the front of her gray sweatpants. Water and blood. "Okay," I said, my voice snapping into command mode. "Okay, listen to me. You are going into labor. I need you to sit down, now." I guided her onto the sofa. She was hyperventilating, her breath coming in short, sharp whistles. "I am calling 911, I said, pulling out my phone. "No!" She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "No, don't call him. Don't call Caleb. Please." "I am not calling Caleb," I said firmly. "I am calling an ambulance. You are 27 weeks. Brianna, we need to get you to the hospital. Now breathe with me. In through the nose, out through the mouth." I dialed the number. "Emergency," I said into the receiver. "I have a female, 26 years old, 27 weeks pregnant, possible placental abruption or preterm labor triggered by shock. She is bleeding. We are at..." I rattled off the address on Elberon Avenue. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, kneeling on the floor beside Brianna. She was sobbing now, a terrifying mixture of physical pain and emotional ruin. "He lied," she choked out between breaths. "He lied about everything. My baby. My poor baby." "Focus on the baby," I said, taking her hand. It was cold and clammy. "Forget him right now. You need to keep your heart rate down for Mara. Do it for Mara." The name of the child my husband had created with her, tasted strange on my tongue. But it worked. Brianna squeezed my hand, latching onto the name like a lifeline. We heard the sirens wail in the distance, growing louder. "I am sorry," she whispered, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I didn't know. I swear to God. Gracie, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, and I meant it, in that moment. Looking at the wreckage of her life, I felt no hate for her. Caleb had done this. He had built a house of cards using our bodies as the foundation, and now it was collapsing on top of her. The paramedics burst through the door a minute later. They were efficient and loud, filling the small room with static from their radios and the smell of latex. They loaded Brianna onto the stretcher. "Who are you?" one of the EMTs asked me, looking at my suit. "Are you a relative?" I looked at Brianna. She was terrified, searching for a familiar face in a sea of strangers. Caleb wasn't here. Her family wasn't here. I was the only person in the world who knew the truth of what was happening. "I am a friend," I lied. "I am riding with her." I climbed into the back of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, sealing us in. As the vehicle lurched forward, sirens screaming, Brianna reached out again. "Gracie," she rasped, her voice weak. Promise me you won't let him come. Not yet. I can't. I can't look at him. I looked down at her. I promise, I said. He won't come near you until you are ready. The third party, the imaginary crazy ex-wife, was dead. The imaginary perfect new wife was dead. There were just two of us now, two women who had been played for fools, speeding toward the hospital to save a life that didn't ask to be part of this mess. Caleb Reed thought he was the conductor of this orchestra, but he had just lost control of the music. The reality of a lie is often abstract until you see it breathing through a plastic tube. Mara arrived 40 minutes after we wheeled through the emergency bay doors. It was not a joyous occasion with flowers and balloons. It was a terrified, clinical scramble of neonatologists and respiratory therapists. When the dust settled, she was not in Brianna's arms. She was inside a glass box in the neonatal intensive care unit, wired to machines that beeped with a rhythm that felt far too fast for a human heart. She weighed 2 pounds and 4 ounces. I stood outside the NICU window, watching Brianna press her hand against the glass. Brianna was still in a wheelchair, pale and shaking, wearing a hospital gown that was too big for her deflated frame. She looked at that tiny, translucent scrap of humanity fighting for every breath, and she broke. It wasn't the loud, hysterical crying of the apartment. It was a silent, body-shaking sob of guilt. She believed this was her fault. She believed her stress, her shock, had forced her daughter out into the cold world 3 months too early, for the first time since I found the negative pregnancy test in my bathroom trash. I cried. I did not cry for my own empty womb. I did not cry for my failed marriage. I cried because I was watching the physical cost of Caleb's deception. He hadn't just broken a vow. He had endangered a life. Mara was fighting a battle she should not have had to fight yet, all because her father decided to play God with 2 women's lives. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The time for grieving was over. The time for accountability had arrived. He needs to see this, I said, my voice thick but steady. Brianna looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. He will destroy everything if he comes here. He will talk his way out of it. He always does. Not this time, I said, because he thinks he is coming to manage you. He does not know he has to get through me first. We formulated the plan in the quiet hum of the waiting area. It was simple. Caleb thrived on information control. We were about to cut his supply. Brianna dialed his number. She put it on speaker, holding the phone with a trembling hand. "Bree?" Caleb's voice came through instantly, breathless and panicked. "I have been calling you for 2 hours. Where are you? Why aren't you answering?" "I am at the hospital," Brianna said. She kept it short, just as I had instructed. "The baby came. You need to come now." "What? Now? But it is too early," he stammered. Okay. I am leaving the office. Which hospital?" "University Hospital. 3rd floor. NICU waiting room." She hung up before he could ask questions. We sat side by side on the vinyl chairs. We did not hold hands, but there was a magnetic field connecting us. We were 2 witnesses preparing for a trial. 30 minutes later, the elevator doors pinged. Caleb burst into the hallway. He was still wearing the suit he had left my house in that morning, but his tie was askew and his hair was windblown. He looked the part of the frantic, devoted father perfectly. He scanned the room, his eyes wild, until they landed on Brianna in her wheelchair. "Brianna!" he shouted, rushing forward, ignoring the quiet please signs. "Oh my God, are you okay? Is the baby okay?" He dropped to his knees beside her chair. Reaching for her hands, he didn't even look at the person sitting in the chair next to her. To him, I was just background noise, another family member waiting for news. "I was so scared," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I drove as fast as I could. Tell me she is okay." Brianna did not take his hands. She pulled them into her lap. She looked at him with a gaze that was no longer adoring. It was dead. "She is in an incubator. Caleb," she said flatly. "We will get the best doctors," he promised. his eyes darting around. "I will handle everything. I will take care of the bills. You just focus on—" "Hello, Caleb," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, the tone I used when asking him to pass the salt at dinner. Caleb froze. It was a total physical arrest. He stopped breathing. He stopped moving. Slowly, terrified. He turned his head to the left. When he saw me sitting there, legs crossed, my portfolio on my lap, the blood drained from his face so violently that I thought he might faint. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from me to Brianna, then back to me. His brain was misfiring. The two worlds he had kept meticulously separated by zip codes and lies had just collided in a sterile hospital corridor. "Gracie?" he squeaked. It was a pathetic sound. "What? What are you doing here?" "I drove Brianna to the hospital," I said. Since her husband was unavailable, Caleb stood up. He backed away, his hands coming up in a defensive posture. Wait a second. I can explain." "You are misunderstanding what this is." He looked at Brianna. "Bri, honey, listen to me. She is confused. She has been having a hard time lately. Mental health stuff. You know I told you about her." "Stop," Brianna said. It wasn't a scream, but it had the force of a command. "She showed me the marriage license. Caleb, the real one. She showed me the insurance policy, the one you stole to pay for my ultrasound." Caleb flinched. He looked back at me, his eyes narrowing. The panic was shifting into aggression. He realized the charm wasn't working, so he tried to switch tactics. He tried to divide us. "Gracie, can I speak to you in the hallway? Just for a minute?" He gestured toward the elevators. "I think we need to clear this up privately. It is not fair to upset Brianna right now." "We are not going anywhere," I said, remaining seated. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say to her. We are family now, aren't we? Sister wives?" "You are being irrational," he hissed, dropping the volume but increasing the intensity. "You are making a scene in a hospital. You made the scene, Caleb," I said. "You made the scene when you married a second woman while still married to the first. You made the scene when you forged my signature on a loan application. You made the scene when you forged a power of attorney." At the mention of the forgery, the fight went out of him. He knew I had found the papers. He looked at the exit sign. The instinct to run was taking over. He checked his watch, pretending to receive a vibration. I have to take this," he stammered, pointing to his phone, which was clearly dark. "It is the specialist. I need to go get better signal." He turned on his heel and started walking briskly toward the double doors. He was going to run. He was going to get in his car, drive to the airport, and disappear. I knew his pattern. When the ledger didn't balance, he closed the account. "Officer!" I called out. A hospital security guard who had been hovering near the nurses' station looked up. "That man is trying to leave," I said clearly, standing up. "He is currently under investigation for identity theft and insurance fraud, and he is a flight risk." It was a bluff. The police hadn't officially arrived yet, but the word fraud in a hospital carries weight. The guard stepped into Caleb's path. "Sir, wait a moment," the guard said, his hand raised. "Get out of my way," Caleb snapped, trying to push past. "My wife is crazy. I am leaving." Just then, Caleb's phone actually rang. The shrill ringtone echoed in the silent hallway. He stopped. He pulled it out of his pocket automatically. He looked at the screen, and his face went from pale to gray. He didn't answer it, but he didn't have to. I knew who it was. "That is the bank. Isn't it, Caleb?" I asked, walking up behind him. "Or maybe the credit card company? I froze everything this morning. The line of credit you opened in my name? Frozen. The joint account? Empty. The cards? Declined." He turned to look at me, and the mask was completely gone. There was no husband left. There was only a desperate, cornered rat. You froze the accounts?" he whispered. "Do you know what you have done? I have a bridge loan due on Monday. If that money isn't there, you go to jail? I suggested. No, he shouted, causing a nurse to look out from a room. No, I lose the leverage. It is all leverage. Gracie, the houses, the loans, this. He gestured vaguely at Brianna. It is all a system. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. And there it was, the confession. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about wanting a family. It was a Ponzi scheme. Brianna wasn't a partner. She was an asset. I wasn't a wife. I was a creditor. He had been shuffling emotional and financial debt between us, robbing Peter to pay Paul, hoping the market would turn before the truth came out. It is over, Caleb, Brianna said. She had wheeled herself up behind us. She was holding onto the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. The system is broken, and you are bankrupt. Caleb looked at her, then at the guard, who was now speaking into his radio, calling for backup. He looked at the elevator doors, but they remained closed. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the sanitized floor. He put his head in his hands. I just wanted to be someone, he muttered into his palms. I looked down at him. I felt no pity. I felt only the cold satisfaction of a balanced equation. You are someone, Caleb, I said. You are the defendant. The morning after the confrontation in the hospital corridor, I did not go to work. Instead, I walked into the offices of Grant & Associates, a firm located on the 32nd floor of a glass tower downtown. I had an appointment with Alyssa Grant, a divorce attorney known for dissecting high-asset dissolutions with the precision of a surgeon. I did not bring tissues. I brought 3 binders of financial records, the insurance claims I had exported from the hospital system, and a timeline of events that I had constructed with forensic accuracy. Alyssa was a sharp woman in her 50s with glasses perched on the end of her nose and a demeanor that suggested she had heard every lie a husband could possibly tell. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. She flipped through the pages of my audit, her eyebrows raising slightly as she saw the duplicate insurance claims and the unauthorized credit pulls. Mrs. Reed, she said, closing the binder, this is not just a divorce case. This is a crime scene. We are looking at identity theft, insurance fraud, wire fraud, and forgery. We need to file for an emergency protective order to freeze every asset he has touched. And we need to do it before the banks open for their afternoon processing. We spent the next 4 hours drafting the motions. It was during the discovery phase of our initial investigation that the true depth of Caleb's financial architecture was revealed. Alyssa pulled a public records search on my social security number. Are you aware of an entity called GC Real Estate Ventures, LLC? She asked, turning her monitor toward me. No, I said. We never formed an LLC. According to the Secretary of State, you did, she said. It was incorporated 14 months ago. You are listed as the sole proprietor. Caleb is listed as the registered agent, and looking at the lien search, this company has taken out 3 hard money loans totaling $150,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. He had created a shell company using my initials, forged my consent, and used it to borrow money at predatory interest rates to fund his double life. He wasn't just spending our savings. He was burying me in debt that would take decades to repay. He had turned my credit score into his personal piggy bank. We are filing an affidavit of forgery immediately, Alyssa said, typing furiously. We are going to dissociate you from this debt. But Gracie, you need to prepare yourself. This man has been planning this for a long time. I thought I had reached the bottom of the well, but later that afternoon, I received a call that pushed me into a darkness I didn't know existed. It was Dr. Carlisle. Gracie, he said, his voice grave. I have been reviewing the access logs for the clinic's patient portal as you asked. I am willing to testify that Caleb accessed Brianna's records, but I found something else, something that concerns your treatment. What is it? I asked, gripping the phone. I was looking at the pharmacy dispensation records linked to your file, he said. For the last 6 months, I prescribed you clomiphene and progesterone to assist with ovulation and implantation. You told me in our sessions that you were taking them religiously, but seeing no results. I never got a prescription for clomiphene, I said, confused. You told me we weren't there yet. You said we were still doing natural cycle monitoring. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. No, Gracie. Doctor, Carlyle said softly, I wrote those prescriptions, and according to the pharmacy log, they were picked up, every single month. The signature on the pickup log is spouse. Caleb picked them up. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Caleb had been intercepting my medication. He had gone to the pharmacy, paid for the fertility drugs with our joint account, and then… What? Thrown them away? Flushed them? He had let me believe my body was failing. He had watched me cry over negative tests month after month, knowing all along that he was the one ensuring I couldn't get pregnant. He didn't just want a double life. He wanted to keep me broken. A broken wife is a dependent wife. If I was depressed, feeling defective, and focused entirely on the struggle to conceive, I was less likely to look at the bank statements. I was less likely to question his late nights. He had weaponized my desire to be a mother to keep me distracted while he played house with someone else. He stole 2 years of my life, I whispered. I am sending the logs to your lawyer. Doctor, Carlyle said, this is medical interference. It is actionable. By the time I left Alyssa's office, the sun was setting. My phone, which I had kept on silent, was flooded with notifications. Caleb, the messages started as pleas and quickly devolved into desperate bargaining. Gracie, please pick up. We can fix this. I will sign over the house. I will give you everything. Just don't go to the police. It was a mistake. The loans were temporary. I was going to pay them back next month. Think about us. Think about what we built. I read them with the detachment of a coroner reading a suicide note. He wasn't sorry. He was terrified. He was trying to negotiate a settlement for a crime that had no price tag. I forwarded every screenshot to Alyssa. I did not reply. The next day, the forensic evidence began to solidify into a cage. I went to the bank to finalize the fraud affidavits. The branch manager, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, had taken a personal interest in the case after seeing the forged power of attorney. We have the digital signature logs, she told me, sliding a report across her desk. The loans were signed electronically via DocuSign. We traced the IP address of the device used to apply the signature. She pointed to a string of numbers. That IP address does not trace to your home in Mount Adams, she said. It traces to a geolocation in East Price Hill. And the timestamp? It matches a login from an iPad registered to Caleb Reed. It was irrefutable. He had signed my name while sitting in Brianna's living room, likely while she was in the kitchen making him dinner, thinking he was working hard for their future. The Economic Crimes Unit of the Cincinnati Police Department contacted me 2 hours later. Alyssa had sent over the package. They were no longer treating this as a civil dispute. The dollar amount of the fraud, combined with the interstate nature of the insurance wire transfers, had elevated this to a felony investigation. We are opening a case file, the detective told me. We have enough for a warrant to seize his electronics. We are going to look at everything, emails, texts, deleted files. If he has an LLC, he has books, and guys like this always keep a second set of books. Caleb continued to text. He was spiraling. You are ruining my life. Gracie, they are going to take my license. Do you want that? Do you want me to go to jail? I can get you money. I have a deal closing on Friday. $50,000 cash. Just drop the affidavit. It was a bribe. He was trying to buy my silence with money he probably didn't even have. Money he would likely steal from another client or another woman. I sat in my living room, the room that was finally truly mine, and typed a single message to Alyssa. Do not accept any offers. Proceed with the criminal referral. I then sent a text to Brianna. She was still in the hospital, recovering from the emergency C-section, sitting by the incubator where Mara was fighting for her life. The police are involved. I wrote, do not answer him. Let the lawyers handle it. We are safe. A moment later, Brianna replied, I blocked him an hour ago. The nurse said he tried to call the NICU to get updates. Security stopped him at the front desk. He is gone. For the first time in my life, the ledger was perfectly balanced. Caleb had spent years calculating the risks, moving numbers, and manipulating people, but he had forgotten the most basic rule of accounting. Eventually, every debt must be paid, and his bill had just come due. The days following the hospital confrontation were defined not by shouting matches, but by the quiet, brutal efficiency of administration. While Caleb was frantically trying to plug the holes in his sinking ship, Brianna and I were building a raft. The reality of Brianna's situation had settled over her like a heavy blanket. She was 26, recovering from major abdominal surgery, and her daughter was living in a plastic box. To make matters worse, the financial house of cards Caleb had built was collapsing. Because I had flagged the insurance fraud, the coverage for Mara's NICU stay was immediately suspended. The hospital billing department was already calling. I sat by Brianna's wheelchair in the hospital cafeteria. She was staring at a stack of invoices, her hands shaking. It is $3,000 a day, she whispered, looking at a bill. Gracie, I don't have $3,000. I don't even have $300. Caleb paid the rent. Caleb paid for the groceries. I don't have a job because he told me to quit when I got pregnant. He said he wanted to take care of us. He didn't want to take care of you, I said, taking the invoice from her hand. He wanted to control you. There is a difference. I pulled out my laptop. I was no longer the scorned wife. I was the revenue integrity analyst. This was a problem with a solution. And unlike my marriage, the numbers here could be fixed. We are going to apply for emergency state assistance, I said, opening the portal for Ohio Medicaid. Since you are not legally married, because your marriage license is a forgery, you are a single mother with zero income. That makes you eligible for retroactive coverage. We will get Mara's stay covered. We will get you on WIC. We will stabilize the bleeding. Brianna looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. Why are you doing this? I helped him lie to you. I am the reason your husband isn't coming home. My husband isn't coming home because he is a criminal, I said, typing in her date of birth. And I am doing this because Mara is innocent. And frankly, because surviving this is the best revenge you can get. That afternoon, I returned to the house in Mount Adams. I treated it like a hostile environment. I knew Caleb was staying at a hotel downtown. His credit cards were declined. But he had likely swindled a friend into paying. But I couldn't risk him coming back to destroy evidence. I bought heavy-duty plastic bins. I went through the home office with surgical precision. I packed every bank statement, every loan document, every printed email. I took the hard drive from the desktop computer. I took the physical backup of the wedding album. I even took the baby steps bear I had bought. The receipt still inside the box. I moved everything to a climate-controlled storage unit on the other side of town, paid for in cash. If Caleb tried to return to explain or to clean up, he would find nothing but empty drawers and a wife who knew too much. We called it the binder. It was a 3-inch thick black binder that Brianna and I compiled together. We sat in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by vending machines and anxious families, and cross-referenced our lives. June 10th, Brianna said, looking at her phone calendar. He said he was at a closing in Dayton. He didn't come home until 2 a.m. I flipped to my bank records. June 10th, there is a charge for a dinner for 2 at the precinct, and a hotel room charge at the Westin downtown. We taped the receipts next to the text messages. It was a timeline of betrayal. We found the day he told me we couldn't afford a vacation, and matched it to the day he put a down payment on Brianna's apartment. We found the day he told Brianna his crazy ex was harassing him, and matched it to the day I was undergoing a painful dye test for fertility at the clinic. 2 women, 1 strategy. We were stripping him of his narrative power. 3 days later, Caleb reached out. He sent a text, not to me, but to my work email, knowing I couldn't block him there. Gracie, we need to talk. Not about the relationship, about the house. There is a paperwork issue with the title. If we don't fix it, the bank calls the loan. Meet me at the Coffee Emporium on Central Parkway. 10 o'clock. Please. It is purely business. I forwarded the email to Alyssa, my lawyer. He is trying to get you to sign something, Alyssa said over the phone. He knows the fraud affidavit is pending. He needs a clean signature to backdate something. I know, I said. I want to go. Only if you wear a wire, Alyssa said. And only if I am at the table next to you. The coffee shop was busy at 10 o'clock. Caleb was sitting in the back corner, looking diminished. His suit was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. He looked like a man who was running out of runway. When I sat down, he didn't try to hug me. He pushed a cup of black coffee toward me. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice raspy. You said it was about the title, I said, keeping my hands in my lap. Right, he said, pulling a document out of his briefcase. Look, Gracie, I know you are angry, and you have every right to be. But if the bank sees that the original power of attorney is contested, they will foreclose on the Mount Adams house. Neither of us wants that. It destroys your equity, too. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a new power of attorney form, backdated to 6 months ago. I just need you to sign this, he said, clicking a pen and holding it out. It just confirms that you authorize the line of credit. If you sign this, the fraud investigation goes away, the bank backs off, I can pay off the loan. We sell the house, and we split the money. Clean break. I looked at the pen. It was a trap. If I signed this, I was admitting that I had authorized the debt. I would be liable for the $150,000, and his felony forgery charge would vanish. So, I said slowly, making sure my voice was clear for the recording device in my purse. You want me to sign this document today, dated 6 months ago, to replace the one you signed my name on? Caleb looked around nervously. I didn't. Look, the first one was just a placeholder. I was in a rush. I knew you would say yes. This just makes it official. It corrects the file. So the first one was not signed by me? I asked. Gracie, come on, he hissed. I just need you to sign the paper so we don't lose the house. Why are you making this so hard? I am not signing it. Caleb, I said. You have to, he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. If you don't, I go to jail. That, I said, standing up, is the first honest thing you have said in years. Alyssa stood up from the table directly behind him. She was holding her phone, which had been recording video the entire time. Mr. Reed? She said coolly. My name is Alyssa Grant. I represent your wife. We will be adding attempted witness tampering and coercion to the complaint. Have a nice day. Caleb's face went white. He watched us walk out of the coffee shop, realizing he had just handed us the nail for his own coffin. That evening, Brianna filed her motion. With the evidence from the binder, her lawyer filed for full legal and physical custody of Mara, citing the fraud and the unstable environment Caleb had created. She also filed for an emergency restraining order, preventing him from entering the NICU. He is a flight risk and a manipulator, her affidavit read. His presence endangers the health of the child and the mother. The judge granted it within 2 hours. That night, I went back to the empty house. I locked the door. I set the alarm. For the last 2 years, I had laid in that bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why I wasn't enough, wondering why the universe wouldn't give me a child, wondering what secret silence was hanging in the air. Tonight, the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was clean. I took a shower and washed the smell of the coffee shop off my skin. I put on my pajamas. I crawled into the center of the bed, claiming the entire space. I checked my phone one last time. A message from Dr. Carlisle. Gracie, I pulled the server logs. You were right. There are logins to the hospital scheduling system from an IP address in Cancun last May. That was the week you said he was at a finance retreat in Arizona. He was logging in to reschedule your fertility appointments to ensure they didn't conflict with his trip. He was managing your ovulation cycle from a resort in Mexico. It was the final twist of the knife, but it didn't hurt. It just severed the last thread of doubt. He hadn't just cheated. He had orchestrated my pain. He had played God with my body. I turned off the phone. I turned off the light. Tomorrow was the preliminary hearing. Tomorrow, the story would be told on the record. But tonight, for the first time in 100 years, I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The waiting room was closed. I had finally been called back. The courtroom was cold. A deliberate temperature meant to keep tempers low and logic high. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Alyssa Grant. I was wearing a navy blue blazer, the kind of structured garment that made me feel armored. Across the aisle, Caleb sat with a court-appointed attorney because, as of yesterday morning, his personal accounts were frozen and his retainer check to his private counsel had bounced. He looked smaller than I remembered. The swagger was gone, replaced by the twitchy energy of a man whose options had evaporated. When the judge called the session to order, I did not tremble. I stood up and presented my case not as a scorned wife, but as a revenue integrity analyst presenting a final audit report. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply walked the court through the binder. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady in the acoustic silence of the room, "the evidence shows a systematic dismantling of my financial identity. Exhibit A details unauthorized loans totaling $150,000. Exhibit B shows insurance claims filed under my policy for a dependent who does not legally exist in my household. Exhibit C contains the forged power of attorney, digitally signed from an IP address that places the defendant in East Price Hill, not in our marital home." I spoke in numbers. I spoke in dates. I stripped the emotion out of it until all that remained was the raw, undeniable math of his betrayal. Caleb stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. Then, "Doctor," Carlyle took the stand. He was the moral anchor of the proceedings. He adjusted his glasses and spoke with the gravity of a man who had taken an oath to do no harm. "I have submitted the server logs from the clinic's patient portal." "Doctor," Carlyle testified, "they show that on May 12, 2025, the defendant logged into Mrs. Reed's account and canceled a critical fertility treatment appointment. He then logged in 3 days later to mark a prescription for ovulation medication as picked up when the patient never received it. The access point for these logins was a secure Wi-Fi network at a resort in Cancun, Mexico. Mrs. Reed was in Cincinnati at the time." A ripple of unease went through the courtroom. Financial fraud was one thing, medical sabotage was another. It was visceral. It was cruel. "Furthermore, Doctor," Carlyle continued, "I witnessed the defendant access the medical records of Miss Brianna Hale on my private office computer without authorization, confirming his knowledge of the second pregnancy while simultaneously denying it to his wife." Caleb's lawyer tried to object, citing hearsay, but the judge overruled him. The digital footprint was indelible. Then came the hammer blow regarding the bigamy. Alyssa projected the marriage certificate from Claremont County onto the screen. The defendant, Caleb Reed, knowingly entered into a second marriage with Ms. Brianna Hale, Alyssa stated. However, note the spelling of the groom's name, R-E-I-D. He altered a single letter. He used a passport application with a clerical error to obtain a secondary driver's license under this alias. This was not a mistake, Your Honor. It was a calculated evasion of the state's vital record system to prevent the marriages from being cross-referenced. Caleb stood up then, unable to help himself. "It was a misunderstanding," he blurted out, his voice cracking. "I was trying to do the right thing by Brianna. I was going to annul the first one. I just needed time to sort out the assets. I am not a criminal. I am just a guy who got in over his head." The judge looked at him over the rim of her glasses. She did not look impressed. She looked at the signature logs. She looked at the IP addresses. She looked at the timeline of payments. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, her voice icy, "you did not get in over your head. You built a second swimming pool and filled it with stolen water. Your defense is contradicted by every single piece of data in this room." Before the judge could issue her ruling on the protective order, The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 officers in suits walked in, followed by a uniformed bailiff. One of them was the detective from the Economic Crimes Unit I had spoken to. He walked straight to the bailiff and whispered something. The bailiff approached the bench and handed the judge a folded piece of paper. The judge read it, her expression hardening even further. She looked at Caleb. "Mr. Reed, it appears this hearing is being recessed," she said. The detective stepped forward. "Caleb Reed, we have a warrant for your arrest on 3 counts of felony wire fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of forgery in the 1st degree." Caleb's face went the color of ash. "What? No, I am here for a civil hearing. You can't do this." "We also have evidence suggesting you are a flight risk," the detective said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "We flagged a purchase made at 4 this morning using a prepaid debit card, a one-way ticket to San Jose, Costa Rica, departing tonight at 11 p.m. We also intercepted a request for a cashier's check in the amount of $80,000 from the sale of a vehicle titled to your wife." The courtroom went silent. The misunderstood husband act shattered completely. He wasn't planning to fix things. He was planning to run, leaving me with the debt and Brianna with the baby. He was going to cash out the last of my assets and disappear into the tropics. Caleb looked at the exit, then at the officers. He realized the walls had finally closed in. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply slumped, the air leaving his body. The officers approached him, pulled his hands behind his back, and the metallic click of the handcuffs echoed like a gavel strike. It was the sound of a ledger finally closing. He looked at me one last time as they led him out. There was no love in his eyes, only the blank stare of a man whose script had run out. I watched him go, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of relief. The ghost that had haunted my house was gone. The judge granted everything in our emergency motion. She issued an order preventing the bank from foreclosing on my home due to the fraudulent nature of the loans. She signed a directive to the credit bureaus to scrub the unauthorized debts from my report. She granted Brianna full medical and legal custody of Mara, with a restraining order that would keep Caleb away until the criminal trial was concluded, which, given the evidence, would likely be years from now. A week later. I stood in the NICU. The constant beeping of the monitors had become a familiar, almost comforting rhythm. Brianna was sitting in the rocking chair, holding a tiny bundled form against her chest. Mara was off the ventilator. She was breathing on her own. She was small, fragile, but she was fierce. I watched them through the glass. Brianna looked up and saw me. She smiled, a real smile, tired but genuine. She motioned for me to come in. I walked over and looked down at the baby. Mara had Caleb's nose, but she had Brianna's fighting spirit. "She gained 2 ounces yesterday," Brianna whispered. "That is a lot for someone this size," I said softly. "We got the approval letter for the state insurance today," Brianna said. "Thank you. Gracie, I don't know what I would have done without you. You saved us." "We saved each other," I said. I looked at Mara, and then I looked at my own reflection in the darkened window of the nursery. For years. I thought being a mother meant physically carrying a child. I thought it meant positive tests and baby showers. But standing there, watching this young woman hold her daughter, knowing that I had been the one to secure their safety, to fight off the predator, to ensure they had a home and a future, I realized I had done the most motherly thing possible. I had protected the vulnerable. I had stood my ground when everyone else ran. I left the hospital and drove to a pharmacy. I bought a single box. When I got home to Mount Adams, the house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. It was mine. I went to the bathroom and took the test. I waited the 3 minutes. I looked at the result. Negative. A single pink line. For the first time in 2 years. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a hollow ache in my chest. I smiled. I looked at that negative sign, and I didn't see a failure. I saw a clean slate. I saw a body that was mine again, no longer pumped full of unnecessary drugs, no longer monitored by a man in Mexico, no longer a vessel for someone else's expectations. I threw the test in the trash, right on top. I didn't hide it under tissues this time. I washed my hands, looked at myself in the mirror, and saw a woman who had walked through the fire and came out holding the water bucket. The audit was complete, the debt was canceled, and for the first time in a very long time, my life was purely, wonderfully positive. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that like button so we can share this journey with even more people.